Roberts lived her life under a microscope for almost a decade, and for everything that we know about her, we know absolutely almost nothing about her husband. We've never seen him at any press conferences. The only photos we get of him are these candid shots that are clearly coming from Virginia. I mean, we've never even heard this man speak. He's never sat down for an interview. And that's fine. Sometimes people are private. But while I was flipping through Virginia's memoir, I found this picture of them at their wedding. And I couldn't help but think, that doesn't look like two people who had just fallen madly in love after 10 days and are eloping. I mean, this feels like it barely even counts as a smile. I mean, it's a huge contrast from the time we've seen with Jeffrey. Before I get any deeper with this, I just want to say that all of this needs to be taken with a grain of salt. This is my opinions. In no way am I trying to undercut what anybody went through. In no way am I calling any of them a liar. But perhaps the events in Virginia's life have been altered and skewed to fit a certain narrative to protect certain people, as well as painting Virginia in a more positive light and making her less of a conspirator. And the more I'm looking at her story with a cold eye, the more I'm seeing inconsistencies, the more timeline isn't making sense. For example, at the same time Virginia gave this picture to a reporter, she gave the reporter several other photos, like this photo taken with the monk that married them in Thailand. And please, at any point, tell me if it looks like I'm thinking too much about this, but does that look like the same guy to you? Like, it looks like the same guy, but not at the same time period in his life. Like, here's a side-by-side of the two pictures. And Virginia mentioned specifically in her book giving him a Buddha pendant, which seems like that might be what that is, but then he's not wearing it in this picture. And then I looked at this picture again, and I kept coming back to Virginia's face. Her head looks just slightly too small. And look at the heavy shadows on their faces. The shadows look completely off here. Look at the weirdness going on with the bottom of her dress. I mean, look at them side by side. Side by side, there is something weird. I mean, if you look at their family Christmas picture from 2010, he looks much closer to what he looked like 8 years earlier in this picture, supposedly in this picture. I do have a theory on this, but I'll circle back to it. It wasn't until I was skimming the book that I found that she used his full name at one point, Roberto Antonio Giuffre. It wasn't even until that point that I realized that he was Italian. And in fact, his parents had immigrated to Sydney, we don't know when, and he was 26 years old when she was 19. And again, just searching for information on her husband, I typed in his full name into a search engine and this is what came up. Meet Antonio Nina Giuffre, the second highest ranking member of the Corleonesa Sicilian Mafia, who just 6 months prior to their marriage was arrested in Italy, who immediately turned state's witness as soon as he was arrested. He started telling on everybody. And his uncle was John Stanfa, who not only became head of the Philadelphia crime family, but his brother and brother-in-law were made men in the Gambino crime family. We've talked about the Gambino crime family extensively, but one of the Gambino's biggest crime family connections and allies were the Buffalo crime family. And it turns out the Buffalo crime family works out of where? Broward County, Florida. And as it turns out, John Stanfa's Philadelphia crime family controls the majority of the corn graphic business in Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey as of 1977. And as we know from this FBI report from the early 80s that Ron Eppinger was a main proprietor of the corn business. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that Robert Giuffre is part of that crime family. I'm not necessarily saying that his family is a part of that crime family. But there are things about his family and about Robert's past that I'm questioning. Like how Robbie's dad used to work in painting and refurbishing fishing boats, but now the family had a catering business in Sydney. Or how his parents didn't speak like any English. I also noticed immediately a pretty striking resemblance between Nino and Robbie. One that I think is even more pronounced when you look at Virginia and Robbie's son. I mean, it's the ears, it's the eyes, it's the eyebrows. I mean, one eye squinty, one eye not. One eye squinty, one eye not. And if that's not enough for you, somehow I was able to find like this 12-minute clip from some hearing involving Nino Giuffre, like some sort of appeals thing, some sort of hearing. I don't know. It was in Italian. I had no idea what was going on. But I could hear them talking about Nino, and they were giving history about Nino and showing this old mugshot that I've showed you. So I'm going to take a stab in the dark and say that this was about Nino. And if that's the case, that seems to be what Nino looks like somewhat more recently. Anybody else immediately struck how similar he looks to Robert? I mean, come on, they look like the same dude. And if this guy ratted out a whole bunch of the mob, it would make sense that the family might be in hiding. Or is it extended family? I don't know. I don't know the connection. I mean, this guy's arrest was a big effing deal. And even though he completely cooperated, he supposedly is still in prison to this day. Now, I do suspect that this was an arranged marriage of some kind. Maybe they met and fell in love. Maybe their story is real. But I will tell you what I suspect, because I think this is a younger picture of him. I think that is Virginia's face photoshopped onto this picture. Here, in Virginia's book, it says that Robbie dropped out of high school when he was 17 because he was bored. He had moved out of his parents' house and lived for a few years with a Korean woman who became his fiancée, despite her parents' objections. I stayed longer than I needed to, he said of that relationship. What if he had actually run off and gotten married to that girl? Because looking closely, the hair around this crown looks black. And maybe that's just part of the crown, but look at Virginia's hair around this time period. Yeah, her roots might have been dark, but not 3-4 inches worth. And you can tell by the little tendrils. Something is just off about this. And remember, in the beginning of Virginia's book, her editor, ghostwriter, whatever you want to call her, she talks about how on January 9th, Virginia was beat up by her Muay Thai trained husband. She reported it to the police, and they didn't charge Robbie with any crime. And then that's when Robbie took out his allegations and got a restraining order for the whole family to keep Virginia from seeing her kids. There was also a 2015 assault while they were living in Colorado, where in 2015, Robbie was arrested for assaulting her, and a restraining order was taken out on him. But according to the sheriff's department, documentation of that incident was no longer available to the public. What does that mean? It sounds like Robbie was connected in his own ways. And I know Australia has a problem with DV and the court systems and everything. I recognize that. I understand that. But there's no way anybody in their right minds in law enforcement would see this woman as she's in the hospital and not immediately arrest her professionally trained martial arts husband. It was just 2 months prior to this that Virginia told her publisher that they wanted the book to be published in the event of her death. It had been more than 2 years since the last time they had worked on the book. Now, we all remember Virginia posting this picture of her in the hospital saying she was in a car accident, she had renal failure, she had 4 days to live. It was all bizarre. But it's quite obvious that these bruises are from her husband's assault on her. Then there was backpedaling by her family saying that she was going to post that privately on an account, but it was her public one. It was weird. It was a stupid explanation. But it seems pretty obvious to me that this is a picture that Virginia could not have taken herself, based on her lying down, her arm positions, everything. Then like 6 days later is when she comes out to People magazine saying that her husband has been physically abusing her for years. And so I wonder if this Instagram post was posted by somebody with access to her Instagram as a warning to not come forward about it. I mean, Virginia's own dad came forward, and the only time he's ever spoken publicly about this case was to say somebody got to her. Well, it doesn't feel like it would be related to EpiPen, since we're not allowed to say his name anymore, because they let her live for this long. The only thing that seemed to change was her relationship with her husband, who immediately had her cremated, didn't invite any of the family. To this day, we don't know any details of how she unalived herself. And now there's this huge legal battle going on because they're trying to challenge the will that she wrote 6 months before her death, naming her housekeeper and her lawyer as the executors of the estate. But 2 of her now adult sons are challenging that, saying their mother wasn't fit mentally to write a will. And if by November she had 2 adult sons challenging the will, that means at least one of them had to have been an adult when the husband took out the restraining order for the family, which means she wasn't cut off from all of her children like they claimed was the reason for her to end herself. And it seems like she's missing a ton of money. Just in 2022, she had a $16 million settlement with Prince Andrew, but in court documents, her sons only provided the court with $500,000 worth of assets. And if the informal will that she wrote out, if that's invalidated, then that means that she had had no will prior to that. She was like, release this book in the case of my death, but didn't make a will. She had also written in her diary about how she was afraid that her husband would take all of the money and gamble it away. And I can't help but wonder if Robbie didn't just become her handler, because when she was finally interviewed by the FBI for the first time in 2011, after she had revealed her identity publicly to the Daily Mail, Robbie insisted on being next to her during the FBI interview, and at one point while questioning her story and going over details, he lashed out at the FBI agents, calling them sick perverts and saying, "Do you really need to know every effing thing that happened in each and every room?" Yeah, Robbie, they do. I don't think Virginia was ever free. I think she just got sold to a different cage.